What's up, everybody? It's the Welcome to the Show podcast, brought to you by Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/welcome to the show to get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial. That's audibletrial.com/welcome to the show. One more thing. If you have 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate it if you guys tapped into our podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a rating, give us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and yeah, we would greatly appreciate that. So today we have part 2 of the Nick Francona interview. This portion of the interview delves a little deeper into some shady practices in Major League Baseball. We're going to discuss Francona's time with the Los Angeles Dodgers, with the New York Mets, and some other things that are happening in the world of baseball that are out there, certainly, but not being talked about not nearly enough. So we're hoping that with Nick Francona here, we can get to the bottom of it a little bit more and make more people aware of these issues. I'm of the belief that, something that you truly love can't be all the way great until you know the absolute truth. And I love baseball, regardless of all these things that are happening or that have happened. Major League, baseball has always been, well, the NBA and MLB has been my love. I love those two sports with a passion. But when I hear that there's shady things happening in the background, instances of sexual assault being concealed, you have illegal player trafficking, you have drug abuse, you have domestic abuse, things of that nature. I don't appreciate it when it's being hidden, because in my mind, if you're not putting it out there for the problem to be fixed, then you're a part of the problem. So I know that we're not going to fix this issue on our own. I'm not out on some crusade against baseball. Believe me, I want baseball to get better. I want baseball to go on. I'm hoping that I can, or that we can, the Welcome to the Show podcast can be a part of the solution to these issues, a medium for people to feel comfortable coming on and speaking their minds and speaking their truths. And I invite anybody to come on the show and talk to us about any of it. You're going to hear Gabe Kapler's name a lot. I invite Gabe Kapler to come on and deny these claims and tell us why he denies it. You know what I mean? I want Major League Baseball to come on, anybody in Major League Baseball, and tell us that what Nick has said here isn't true. But give us the proof with it. Until then, I believe Nick. So without further ado, without talking so much, which I already have, here's Nick Francona. Last fall, we learned that the Department of Justice launched an investigation into baseball's recruitment of international players, and it had some evidence in it in regards to the Los Angeles Dodgers and some of the practices that were happening within the organization, like the executives developing a database measuring the levels of behavior, and some players were even rated as criminal, but it was almost celebrated in a way. So I wanted to ask you, so while you were with the Dodgers, you were the assistant director of player development, right?
That's correct. Well, let me correct one thing.
Yeah, sure.
That you said the charts that were kept, that was in regards to colleagues of ours, not in regards to ranking any players or anything right. as criminal. It was different fellow employees.
Right. It was you were rating like not Los Angeles Dodgers players who I guess are considered employees too, right? But rather people in the front office. Is that right? Or employees of members of the front office?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So like scouts, other executives in some cases, it was a handful of fellow employees.
Gotcha. Okay. So, all right. So to dial it back a little bit, just to kind of understand this a little more. So as an assistant director of player development, what does that job entail exactly?
Primarily, it's going to. I mean, it might be a little different in different organizations, but for the most part, it's helping to run the minor league system, and you'll have anywhere from 5 to 8 minor league teams in each organization, from AAA all the way down to complex level baseball in Arizona or Florida at the spring training sites, and including in the Dominican Republic, and that's where there's a lot of overlap between the player development side and the international scouting side is primarily just at those academies. The academies serve as a bit of a de facto headquarters or operating base for international scouting, and is also a kind of an entry level key spot for player development also.
Okay, so just to understand better, so the player development side of things, it does coincide with international players as well, right?
If I'm understanding the question correctly, there is a lot of overlap, and
right.
To do it correctly, there should be, in the sense that you're getting you want the developmental philosophies, the things our coaches and staff are teaching the players to be consistent, all the way down from when we sign a 16-year-old Venezuelan or Dominican player, and they're at their academy in the Dominican Republic. When they get promoted and come over to the U.S., you want there to be some consistency and have a coherent path for them as they move up the pipeline.
Okay. I was gonna say, any notable players during your time with the Dodgers in the minors that are currently in the majors right now?
We had when I first got there, we had a lot of guys that were kind of right on the cusp of becoming big leaguers. So you had like Jock Peterson, Corey Seager were at the upper levels of the minor leagues. There's a lot of guys that have gone on to other organizations as part of trades. And then there were a lot of Julio Urias. Obviously, he was at he ended up pitching for about a year and then got injured and then came back. And then there were a lot of those were guys that the previous front office had signed and developed for the most part, and it was a pretty stocked farm system when we got there. And then that first year there, the kind of front office philosophy was to use the financial muscle to restock the system. So, and that happened in a couple ways, through obviously spending record amounts of money on both like established Cuban players that signed under the rules for international professionals, and then the Cuban amateurs, and then spending a lot of money on other Latin free agents as well.
And so in terms of working for player development, just to bring it back a little bit, how many people are involved in this? Like, how many employees are there? I know that at the time that you were there, Gabe Kapler was the head of the player development, right? And for the Dodgers, and you kind of worked under him. You know, how many other people worked alongside you guys?
So you're going to have, and this will vary from team to team greatly. Now that's probably where you see the most variance. But in terms of what we had specifically there with the Dodgers, is you're going to have a coaching staff at every affiliate. So every level, you're going to have like a bare minimum of 3. Most places you're getting to 4 or 5 now. And then in places like Arizona and the Dominican, it's going to be a lot more. Then you'll have your coordinators. They're referred to as the rovers, and they'll kind of in each functional area. So pitching, hitting, catching, outfield, base running, etc. You'll have guys that will travel from affiliate to affiliate and be there at instructional league and spring training. And then you'll have a front office staff as well. Yeah. On the player development side, and we had a relatively large one with the Dodgers, where it was, I don't know the exact head count, but I mean it was probably 5 to 10 when you include a lot of the things that might be peripheral, but you're working with them every day. Yeah. And then you end up with the medical staff, the strength and conditioning staff. It's a pretty big department to manage, and with the geographic dispersion, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. And so okay, so then in terms of what that piece by the Sports Illustrated, I forget, I think it was John Wertheim too, where he uncovered all the evidence that is at the hands of the FBI and the Department of Justice, some emails that were exchanged among staff members, in which they interact with Buscones and they're aware of some of the illegal practices that were going on in trafficking players. And they almost were talking about it all willy-nilly in these emails, as if they were talking about exchanging, you know, I don't know, product, or I don't know, like an iPhone or something. You know what I mean? Was that common while you were there? If you feel comfortable discussing that, is that something that was common at the time? And how did that make you feel? Like, were you a part of these conversations, or?
Yeah, it's I think your description is accurate in talking about it kind of in this detached manner, like a product, and in some ways like that is your product. You're trying to put good baseball players in the field, but I think that's where a lot of these people lose perspective and aren't able to step back and consider, like, hey, what we're talking about is actually like a crime here, and part of the reason the part that was interesting for me is a lot of the people on those conversations, they're people that I considered friends and like don't consider them to be like necessarily bad people. But I think when you have this environment that exists, and I think you had the perfect storm there with the Dodgers, where it was probably exacerbated given the personnel involved and the amount of money being thrown around. But it's important to be clear that this is certainly an industry problem.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are in that environment long enough, and it's so openly tolerated, it for them, I'm sure it doesn't feel like you're doing anything wrong necessarily.
So this isn't unique to the Los Angeles Dodgers. This is Major League Baseball wide. This is happening, to your knowledge, pretty much in every team.
I don't want to speculate on what goes on in specific cases with other teams. I will say that I'm very confident that this is an industry-wide problem. There's been the data points from that for decades. There's this wasn't like, it certainly was not a case of the Dodgers inventing some new creative criminal schemes. In a lot of cases, they were just doing what had been done in other places and doing it a lot more belligerently and more often. But that was, I don't think there was anything that was happening there that wasn't happening in other places.
Yeah. And I don't want this to feel like a deposition, or I'm just curious as to, since you were kind of on the inside a little bit, and to just get the audience to understand a little bit more what it is that they're seeing when they read these pieces, because I feel like, as an outsider looking in, they kind of look at it as, oh, this is just one example, one circumstance in which this happened. This isn't common, blah blah blah. But there's enough out there if people wanted to look, that to show that this is a serious issue in baseball. And I'm talking about the recruitment of international players, how in front offices, it's a joke. They engage in illegal practices and so on and so forth. But I'm referring to a piece by, I believe it's John Wertheim. I don't want to discredit. Let me look up.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, it was John Wertheim. It's called "The Evidence That Persuaded U.S. Department of Justice to Investigate Major League Baseball Recruitment of Foreign Players." That's on Sports Illustrated. I'll link it in the episode description. But back to the questions. And again, if at some point you don't want to answer a question or whatever, just tell me flat out, and we can skip it.
No, that's fine. I'm comfortable talking about it. Don't feel like I have anything to hide here. So
good.
Fire away.
So were you ever asked to do anything for the organization in this regard, in regards to, in other words, were you involved in any of these emails, or were you fully aware of the database that the Dodgers were engaging in at the time, when you were with the organization? Yes,
I was on a lot of this stuff came up quite frequently. The charts, for example, that was actually an effort. There were I forget the exact number, probably 5 or 6 of us that we were determining kind of how to it was not a matter of like celebrating the criminality. It was actually like quite the opposite.
Okay.
It was a matter of trying to, like, some of us were trying to clean it up.
Okay.
I think the way it was executed in practice ended up being very distorted, and the right the right value system got thrown to the side a lot, where it was there really wasn't a lot of focus on doing the right thing, and there was a lot more focus on, if we don't do these types of things, is that going to allow us to remain competitive, and how's it going to look, and kind of definitely like an effort to sweep it under the rug, as opposed to actually like cleaning it up. And what you mentioned in the first part of the question about this being an industry-wide problem, and people looking at it like if some people had the reaction of looking at the Dodger stuff and saying, okay, this is one example and an aberration. If that were the case, I think you would see the response from Major League Baseball be a little bit different. And it's been complete. Major League Baseball has dug in their heels and really gone way out of their way to protect this type of thing. If this was not something that was a blight on the game as a whole, Major League Baseball would clean that up in a heartbeat. And I think I let people draw their own conclusions, but in my opinion, it says a lot about the commissioner's office, about the character of the people involved there. And I would go as far as to say that it is a personal indictment of Rob Manfred's character as an individual, that he tolerates this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So Nick, you mentioned trying to initially clean it up, but at one point did you see that no changes were being made, that nothing was really being done to put an end to this? And like, what was it that made you go one step further and to try and ending this?
There were, we identified some stuff early on, to the point where we had some meetings about it at the highest levels of the organization, and kind of what to do about this. And it didn't take me long. I mean, we'd only been there a couple months, where I was pretty dug in on the position of, we need to fire people immediately and like really like cut this out of the organization altogether. And if we need to do an investigation to make sure we're getting it right, do that. But like this is like almost like a crisis that needs to be handled with the right level needs to be treated with the right level of seriousness. And it was a constant topic where it was discussed frequently, kind of what to do. I think it certainly got to the point where I was probably viewed as a bit of a pain in the ass by certain people in the organization for being persistent on this. And the decision was made at a certain point to wait until after July 2nd, which for the listeners that are not familiar with that, that's the signing date for international free agents and amateur players.
Yep.
And the reason that some people at senior levels of the organization made that decision is that there had been there were some deals in place already, which, like, for one is like, again, like, not allowed. And they, particularly for some high profile Cuban players, and they did not want to risk compromising those deals if we made any changes. So the decision was essentially made to tolerate a lot of corruption and criminality in exchange for not compromising the ability to sign some of these players. And that was really disappointing and disheartening.
Mm-hmm.
And it came up quite frequently again, where, like, kind of it felt like that date could not come soon enough. And then while awaiting that, there would be something else would come up that we find that was like the kind of thing that you should probably get fired for immediately and go to prison. And it was there was just like no response or reaction to it. And then you get the date rolls around, and a lot of like feet dragging and a lot of like really capitulating on like not bringing the hammer down and like doing this like in a very congenial, like, don't want to ruffle feathers, and that really pissed me off, because like you have a situation where people are stealing money and outright committing crimes, like let's not give them a pat in the ass on the way out the door. Like they need to go away immediately and not work in baseball again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was disappointing. And then on top of that, it was not by any stretch limited to the group that was. I think there's a couple layers of this that are important to break down. If you have the people that are committing these things directly, but then you also have the people that are enabling them, and that went straight to the top of the organization. I mean, the general counsel himself was breaking the law in a pretty significant way. And I mean, there were some emails in that report that showed that, where they were outright conspiring to move people across borders illegally and lie to the federal government for immigration paperwork. And once it doesn't take a lot of that. Once you kind of have that culture of where people can do these things with complete impunity, and then it's you're going to have executives at the highest levels of the organization get in on the act themselves. That's a pretty slippery slope, and it culturally goes downhill in a heartbeat from there.
So June 2nd rolls, finally gets here, and then you see that you mentioned that, people with their hands in their pockets, not really doing anything about it. Did you actually think that they were going to do something about it, but prior to that? And if you kind of had a feeling that nothing was going to be done to begin with, did you have a plan B?
I knew beforehand that some changes were going to be made, just because there were enough of us, and it was kind of it was kind of at my level and some of my peers. We had kicked and screamed enough about it where there were going to be some changes that was not really even up for discussion anymore. I mean, if it had, there was a certain point where I would have certainly resigned if that did not happen. It was, at that point, it was a matter of like kind of when and how deep are the changes going to go. And I think there was a lot of disappointment in that, and how it was executed and handled from a process perspective. And that, again, like, you have something that is really like a crisis in the organization, and there wasn't so much as an internal investigation about it. It was done very much with the mindset of keeping everything quiet and hoping nobody notices, and that's highly problematic.
That's kind of what gets me about all this, is that, to me, like, if there's you were a military guy, so I'm sure you can agree with this. I'm not. I'm just, my parents are strict. But if there's an issue, you have to fix it. You know what I mean? But it seems like with a lot of these issues that keep popping up in Major League Baseball, and I'm sure in all professional sports, they just seem to sweep it under the rug and try to hide the issue. That's kind of what bothers me about all this. But yeah, let me get back to asking some questions. So a lot of those emails that you referred to as well, where buscones were mentioned a lot in those emails as well. Did you ever interact with a buscon? And what was the nature of that interaction?
Yeah, quite a bit. You would, I'd say there were the circumstances of those interactions tended to be around, you would, if you go to watch a showcase or a tryout, the Buscones are usually hosting those. Mm-hmm. So you'd interact with them there. You're not, in my role, I was certainly not the primary point for doing negotiations with a Buscone, and that really doesn't happen on the player development side. Mm-hmm. But you're trying to stay on top of that and track what's happening with that. And in particular, in our situation, when we knew the level of graft that existed, trying to stay on top of it just so you can keep track and try to keep a lid on it and mitigate the nefarious stuff happening as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And then the other time you'd interact with them is when we were interested in signing a player or knew that we were likely to sign a player. We would a couple of us, there were occasions where you would take the player and or his family out to lunch or dinner, try to get to know them a little better and make them comfortable and try to assess kind of where they're coming from and get a better feel for them as a person. And then also, so when they end up, if they do sign with the team, they have some people that are friendly faces that they know. And the interactions with the Biscones, I actually didn't really mind dealing with them. I mean, I know we talked about this a little bit in the previous discussion, and you're going to have good Biscones, you're going to have bad Biscones. I actually felt it like, given what we were dealing with in the organization at the time, by contrast with the Biscones, you at least knew what they wanted for the most part.
Right.
And so that was a little bit refreshing. And you're gonna have the entire spectrum of them. Like, some of them are gonna do crazy stuff. I view it very much as a lot of them are a product of the system that exists and is in place, and they would kind of respond to the incentives that are out there. And that's it's a fundamentally broken system, and it's pretty disingenuous to put the blame on these guys when they are responding to and operating within the system that's in place.
Right. Have you heard of Buscones encouraging kids as young as 13 years old to use performance-enhancing drugs in order to get noticed by big league teams? There was this Buscon in specific, Rudy Santin. He came out in a news report in the Dominican Republic, flat out accusing Major League Baseball of knowing that this is happening, and he's kind of saying that it's the nature of the business. If he wants to make money and get these players to make it to the bigs, they have to go through extreme measures, and that Major League Baseball teams are aware of it. Do you agree with that, or is that just a Buscon taking it upon himself to try to, work the game as best as he can to try to make as much money as he can?
Well, I don't think those are mutually exclusive in that I think there's enough out there on this where it is unequivocally the case that it has happened in the past, and there's too much evidence to deny it. As much as Major League Baseball would like to, there's been reports about this for 15 years, and I think I think the problem, one of the where it's come up recently in the news, is when you hear a lot of the Biscones talking about this like incentive system where teams are pressuring the Biscones to come up with kind of under the table handshake agreements with the players at a younger age, which is then creating the pressure for them to be more physically developed at a younger age. And that, I think that, and the Biscones have complained about that quite a bit. And the response from Major League Baseball was I'm comfortable in saying that the lawyer for Major League Baseball there was a report from a DR newspaper, and he was quoted in there denying that any of this exists. That's nothing short of an outright lie. The context of that was the lawyer for Major League Baseball was denying that these players are signing underage deals, but all the Biscones are pretty unanimously saying that you guys are testing them for PEDs when at these when they're what many years below the age at which they're eligible to sign, because we have these underage deals. You're therefore testing them, so like you're inherently contradicting yourself. And he got caught in a lie, and the disappointing part about that is that there's really, like, when you can't even have an honest, like, these are real problems that are hard to solve, and you have an institution that instinctually lies and covers up and is just seemingly like allergic to having an honest conversation about these. Nobody's saying that they're easy problems to fix or it's not a mess, but at no point in time are they stepping back and really there's been some variety of these problems for many decades, and they persist into the future because nobody is stopping to say, like, okay, how do we fix this and what's in the best interest of these kids and how do we protect them and look out for them? You have a bunch of guys acting like jackasses who are concerned about the PR spin and trying to make an article go away.
Nick.
And this reminds me real quick, CT, I'm sorry. It kind of reminds me of, I was just talking to CT in the last episode about a documentary I watched about the Fire Festival. Have you heard about that before?
Yeah.
All right. So the reason why it reminds me of it is...
I've seen the documentary. It was outstanding.
Isn't it? It's really good. But it reminds me of it in like the Fire Festival one. It's a silly thing. Like that was just a silly, some stupid dude from Jersey who is a fraudster, and he's probably gonna, this probably isn't the only time he's gonna spend some time in jail. But anyway, it reminds me of that because it started off as this idea, this innocent idea, and it just started to, like, shady things started to happen, and it begot more shady activity from happening to the point where it got out of control. And now how do you fix it? And then these guys are just too proud to stand up in front of the camera and say, we fucked up here, let's try to fix the problem now. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I know, that it's not apples to apples, but that's kind of what MLB is reminding me. It kind of reminds me of right now is that there is this issue. It's a deep issue. It's involving children. And instead of standing up there and saying, all right, we fucked up, all right? Like, clearly these things have happened, X, Y, and Z. Let's try to find a way to fix this problem now, because we do want, to make this work. I don't know if it's that they're afraid of losing millions of dollars or whatever, but it's the right thing to do, and I think that it would help the sport in the long run. I mean, do you agree with that, or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I don't think the financial element is, I don't think you have to inherently lose millions of dollars in order to get these things right. I think it's a matter of the transparency is the problem, and I think that they're afraid of being embarrassed on it.
Mm-hmm.
And where I think it's I think to some degree the dynamic that you described with the comparison to Fire Festival is accurate, but where I think that you see a real slippery slope is that when you have nobody kind of minding the store and keeping an eye on these things and enforcing, you have a broken system, you have rules that don't actually create the behaviors that you want to have ideally, and then even the rules that are in place aren't enforced. When you have teams then competing against each other within the confines of that system, they're inherently going to push the limits further and further and further. And that's where you end up with people eventually committing crimes. And a lot of them don't even view it that way. They view it as the Yankees or Red Sox are doing this, therefore, if I want to sign this player, I need to do that too. And they view it as competing within the confines of their professional environment. And all sense of perspective is lost entirely.
I was going to ask before, in regards to those potential signings and those meetings that were taking place, what was the relationship like between, these prospects and the Buscons? And I guess what I'm getting at is, did it seem like there was like a mutual friendship between them?
That's a really good question. I think that's going to be different in different cases, and that's also an area where the Buscons themselves are pretty careful to make sure there's some opacity there, and they're not going to shine the light on that too much. They're pretty careful about trying to limit the interactions directly with the player without them being there. I mean, they don't want to see that, and I think for obvious reasons. You've heard there's been countless reports where a lot of times, like especially with the Cuban players, these guys are in a couple of exceptional cases have like literally been held hostage by people with guns.
Wow.
In what I think is a lot more common is the players are essentially like de facto hostages, where they're not physically having their freedom of movement restrained, but they might be in the Dominican Republic illegally without papers, and would coming there without any money. So like they might be on the cusp of being millionaires in short order, but until that happens, they are entirely dependent on the Biscones for their kind of daily existence. And then, I mean, there's been quite a few cases where their passport's been taken away, and so these guys, they know the game, and the Biscones are very wary of losing them to other players. So you'll see kind of schemes where they'll be like kidnapped or stolen from one Biscone to another. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing happens quite a bit.
Wow. Isn't that kind of what happened with Puig or with Abreu or something? I know that both of their cases involve some shady activities, like where their lives were threatened and they were,
Yeah, Puig, Leonis Martin, Yaisel Sierra, one of the players that we signed. This one hasn't received nearly as much. It's been reported, but hasn't received nearly as much attention. Scott Eden, who's done a lot of good work on this topic, covered it in a good article, and he had mentioned it almost as like an aside where the player had been. The cops in the Dominican will get in on it, and there's a lot of bribery that goes on there, and one faction took him from another, and that kind of thing happens quite a bit. It's and I think the response on the baseball side has really been to like view this as like not our problem, and that's flat out negligent in my opinion.
Yeah. So how do we remedy the issue of illegal player trafficking? So that's part A of my question. I don't know if you want to wait for part B, but part B is how do we fix these international signing practices that are clearly a problem? Like what can Major League Baseball do to fix these issues, in your opinion?
So I think in general, like starting from the top down, like the international side of baseball is like an absolute cesspool of corruption. And then when you get into the Cuban players in particular, there's a lot more that can go wrong and a lot more that does go wrong, because there's a lot more some additional factors that are introduced unique to that situation. And so I think at the highest level, there needs to be a lack of tolerance for those who engage in these behaviors. That's the starting point, in my opinion. No matter what the specifics of the scheme or the crime are, as long as it's like exists in the open and happens fairly routinely and is openly tolerated, it's never going to go away. And until you can talk about these things honestly and have Major League Baseball show like a real desire to root them out, it's always going to exist. So I think that's where it starts. And I think for example, when you see some of the enforcement measures, whether it's the Braves facing some pretty stern punishments a couple years ago, or the Red Sox getting punished the year before that, in a lot of the response is more confusion within the game than anything else, because people look around and say, well, half the teams are doing this. Why are you cracking down on them? Or why, like, if you actually want to clean it up, then clean it up and be transparent about how you're going about it. And that just, it seems really arbitrary in what's enforced and what's not. And then on the Cuban side, that is, it's a lot more complicated. And I think you've seen a lot of discussion in the last couple months about this with the deal and the cancellation of the deal between MLB and the Cuban Baseball Federation. And it's a complex issue, and I don't think there are easy solutions to that, because it's not necessarily within the purview of Major League Baseball alone to handle that. Right. But I do think there are things that Major League Baseball can do that they haven't done. For one, I think the problems are greatly exacerbated by forcing the players to go to the third countries to sign instead of allowing them to come to the U.S. and sign as free agents. That makes it infinitely worse. And then also, again, just where you do see these problems existing, there's been a pretty much a tolerance for it, and there's people that have profited off of this, and every now and then you'll see an investigation and a trial, and somebody will go away, but there's people that are working for teams that have engaged in this stuff. There's people that are certified agents that have engaged in this, that continue to operate with total impunity. And there really is no interest on the side of baseball as an institution in ridding the game of this. Like you see, like one thing I'd add is you see a lot of hand-wringing from Major League Baseball about this deal with the FCB was done to combat trafficking. I think it's absolutely laughable that anyone would take that seriously, and unfortunately that seems to be like the public narrative of like if you oppose this, you support human trafficking. Like I would challenge anyone to name a single thing that Major League Baseball has done outside of this to indicate the slightest bit of interest in opposing the trafficking that's occurred.
And we've, at this point now, we've heard so much about the human trafficking aspect of this that something does have to be done. I mean, I'm not sure what exactly the solution is. A lot of people have different ideas, but it's certain that baseball doesn't know what it's doing. So I just want to ask one more question before.
I want to add on to that, because that's like I think the way you described it is accurate, and it's like nobody's pretending this isn't a challenging problem. Mm-hmm. But let's convene like some smart people and talk about this openly and transparently, mm-hmm. and figure out the best way to handle it, instead of like you get a bunch of bullshit lies and excuses from Major League Baseball. And I will say, like, on the record and as many times as I can, that these guys do not give a shit about solving this problem. There's nothing to indicate that. And you're really grasping for straws for anybody to suggest that, like, and for Rob Manfred and Dan Halem and the senior executives at Major League Baseball to say, we care so much about this problem, and like, that's why we're doing this deal. Like, if you care about this problem, there's stuff you would have done, and there's stuff you can do mm-hmm. to mitigate it that they haven't shown the slightest bit of interest in doing.
Right. And that goes back to those emails that were exposed in that piece. Mm-hmm. They were blatantly discussing about a player having to stay in I think it was Haiti for a while until his papers came through. I guess they were falsifying his papers, or maybe he was, you know what I mean? And these are Major League Baseball teams that are fully aware of these kinds of practices happening. And so I guess what I'm wondering,
Major League Baseball teams committing them, not just
yeah. And then so why aren't there any criminal charges, forced upon these teams? We hear I don't want to make this political or anything, but the biggest hot topic now is immigration, and how we don't want to let illegal immigrants into this country or whatever. But you have a multi-billion-dollar monopoly, as Billy Corbin refers to Major League Baseball, literally falsifying papers to get an immigrant into this country. You know what I mean? Like, how do we? Why is that okay?
Well, I think on an individual level, and this is a really important point, is that, like, I don't think anybody's blaming the Cuban players themselves for this. I think
no, absolutely not.
Would
no,
make that decision. If anybody, they're put in an impossible situation, and really without much of a choice. And frankly, like, they don't get a ton of say in how a lot of this goes down as well. Well, in most of the case, they make the decision to leave, and they're sort of along for the ride. And the specifics of it are executed by others. And I think as far as like why this is tolerated, I think that's a valid question of, like, as far as like the ethics or morality of it. I would certainly distinguish between a Cuban player coming in on false paperwork that others have created and provided for them, and the people that are systematically profiting off of this. Mm-hmm. That's something that I think we should care a lot about.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, Major League Baseball has designed the system that they have designed, I think, specifically to not solve the problem, but to insulate themselves from legal liability. And so the focus has been on, really, they've been asking themselves for a decade, how do we stay out of jail, and how do we make sure we don't know about this, as opposed to how do we fix it? And so I think that's where you end up with a lot of problems. It certainly, I mean, it's worked in that like there's an abundance of evidence that team officials know about this, and there haven't really been people prosecuted on the team side. And I think a lot of that has to do too with Major League Baseball is an extraordinarily powerful institution with very deep pockets, and like sadly our justice system doesn't handle those situations perfectly all the time, where a lot of people get a little gun shy about doing the right thing when they can defend themselves. And I think sadly justice isn't always equal in this country.
The next part here is involves your time with the Los Angeles Dodgers, involves again Gabe Kapler as the head of player development. Two instances that I'm aware of. One involves a 17-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted by two minor league players, or allegedly sexually assaulted by two minor league players. Allegedly, it was captured on Snapchat. As we know, Snapchat videos go away, so we're not sure, what exactly happened that night. But the girl's grandmother contacts Gabe Kapler to remedy the issue. He decides to offer to take them to dinner instead of, alerting authorities. After that, the incident is reported to authorities by the Arizona Department of Child Safety. And then later in a statement, Kapler denies ever knowing about the sexual assault and says that he believes that that he handled the situation in line with the Los Angeles Dodgers. So that's the first situation, which is there's a lot going on there. The second situation I'm aware of is about a player sexually assaulting a maid. And again, same situation. The authorities aren't alerted. It's kind of kept in-house. Was this standard practice in the Los Angeles Dodgers organization? Was this club policy to try to, handle the situation in-house instead of alerting authorities?
I don't think it was written out in club policy that I ever saw. It was, I think, and again, like one of the, I think this is where like the question of like good leadership comes up of you don't plan on these things happening, but it's how you respond when they do that matters. And I mean, you can't sit there and diagram out having a policy for every specific situation. But I think if you sort of having a moral compass and some integrity matters. And I think in this case, they can have whatever the hell policies they want. Like if they, and I saw that in the comments that they made in that article that they thought this was handled well. And if that's the case, fine. Like, what do you say to somebody that thinks if this is what successful looks like to you, then I would just say that like you're truly a piece of shit as a human being.
I agree. I mean, I was a teacher and a social worker, and it was part of my job. Part of the contract that I signed was that if I'm suspicious of any activities or whatever, that I should alert the authorities. And I guess I was just surprised to see that instead of helping these people out, the reaction was to protect the players. And that's
a Gabe Kapler thing where that one is, that part of it is on Kapler, where like the orientation is like to kind of use this as a learning opportunity or sharpening, as in his language, and that's where again, like I think like when you get in that insular bubble of baseball and people aren't capable of stepping back and saying like, this is that, as a matter of fact, is not the most important consideration right now. I think it's easy for people to go off the rails and make silly decisions like that. And I think they, like, as far as like some of the specifics on that first incident, the part that's sad about it is, I mean, you have the girl has been painted and the Dodgers tried to make it sound, and Kapler specifically, like she either changed her story or didn't. When they say that they didn't know about these things, that as far as I'm aware is not the case at all. And they went out of their way to not ask the right questions and to not find out what happened in a very deliberate manner. And so in that case, like you shouldn't get rewarded and let off the hook because you like chose to bury your head in the sand. And that's
right.
that. I mean, that in that sense, it's the same dynamic that exists with these other problems that we opened up talking about. And that's I think where the problem lies. And on top of that, it's just not true their account of it. I mean, think about the things that they're trying to say, where they're trying to say that they provided a lawyer for the player. But okay, like the obvious question there is, why did the player need a lawyer?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, what did you provide him a lawyer for?
Right. And according to Wertheim's piece, it says something that under, is it Arizona law, that the employer is supposed to provide an employee. But that's besides the fact. I think that what you did in your thread, if you guys haven't seen this in Nick Francona's Twitter account, upon this story coming out, I think it was a day later, maybe, I'm not sure. I don't want to make this up, but I do know that you put out a thread of emails that went on during that first incident. I think it was the first incident or the second one, and it shows that I'm sorry, Gabe, but based on the emails and the text and everything to Gabe Kapler, it sounds like he was being negligent in his job. Like, he wasn't responding to you guys, and you guys were kind of left in the dark and didn't know what to do.
Well, yeah. To clarify, I wrote about the first incident on a Medium post and provided some of the documentation.
Right.
And then I also did a thread on the other incident that occurred. And yeah, I mean, in both, one of the things that was most shocking to me is when some of the reporters found out that there was, I didn't even know that there was law enforcement involvement in that first incident until like shortly before that article came out, and the reporters told me. And I had no idea. I had no idea that the team provided an attorney from the player. I mean, that would have been alarming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty clear that there was cover up of some type. I mean, like, if you're hiding this information internally, you're obviously up to no good there.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, just look at it from a policy perspective of, if you're trying to implement an effective policy at the league level for these things, let's look at the results of what happened, of where you have a team signed a player who was actively under criminal investigation for sexually assaulting a minor. Mm-hmm. How is that okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the team didn't know about it because another team covered it up. Like, that's insanity.
Yeah.
And then in another case, you had in the incident with the hotel maid, you had the player was later signed by the Yankees as a minor league player. He was the Yankees, I'm assuming, did not know about this. Mm-hmm. And again, like that is not success. Like, I view it, if my opinion of it is that Major League Baseball views it as this is a problem only because people know about it.
Right.
Not because there's real problems here. That is not it. Mm-hmm. And that's, if you look at their response, there's a lot of arrogance involved. There's a lot of hand wringing about it. And they chose, I mean, it's almost hilarious in that they chose to attack me by, you have the Dodgers on the one hand saying, oh, Nick Francona had the same amount of information and didn't do anything about it, which, again, is not true. Mm-hmm. They hid a lot of this from me. And then you have Major League Baseball saying this is somebody without firsthand knowledge and questionable motivations. And both of those things cannot be true. Right. So they can't even get their lies straight.
Right.
Nick, did you ever get a chance to confront Gabe Kapler about this in person?
No. I mean, we in the first incident, there was a one day where we talked with the players involved about it. I was in the room while they were talking to the Dodgers general counsel. And then it was pretty clear that they were trying to bury it under the rug, but at that point, the Dodgers general counsel was involved. And then I believe it was after that the player approached Gabe and notified him that the law enforcement had contacted him and was involved somehow, and Gabe arranged with the Dodgers to get him a lawyer. I had no knowledge of that whatsoever. But what's crazy about this is even without, so like I had a very partial part of the story, which was disappointing to me because I thought we were like handling this like fairly openly at the time amongst ourselves, at least, like not, I didn't realize like I was being kept in the dark. And even then, even without knowing, they had more information than I did and realized it was a lot worse than I did. And even then, I mean, there's a paper trail of I wanted to make a change and get rid of the player immediately with just the information that I had. I thought that was enough to send a message. And Gabe really went in like the opposite direction of that and was kind of like we had to like really force his hand to even release the player. And that was, yeah, I mean, like he said his piece. I think it's pretty obvious to anybody that looks at the facts and is just slightly bit discerning that there were a lot of lies and unanswered questions in there. It's, I mean, I think the documents speak for themselves on that one and don't paint a very rosy picture of what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we come to find out about this I think it was about 2 or 3 years after the fact. And so let's delve into your departure from the Dodgers to kind of set this up a little bit. According to the Wertheim piece, you wanted to take a leave to get a TBI, a traumatic brain injury assessment at home base program.
Let me stop you right there. That was actually what some of the conflict about that. I did not want to take a leave.
Oh, you didn't want to take a leave, but Gabe Kapler wanted you to.
Yeah.
Okay. And so.
Yeah, so I had mentioned I was this was over Christmas, and I'm going to be at home in Boston, and I had been getting some headaches, and my mom had been wanting me to get a TBI screening, and I had mentioned it to Gabe with the idea in mind that I might need to fly back at one point, but really this was not a big deal, and in retrospect I should not have told him, period. But mm-hmm. I did there were points where he and I had a pretty good relationship, and honestly didn't think a ton of it. And his response was pretty weird, and initially it was under the guise of being supportive, but mm-hmm. was like, we're going to be supportive in a way that like he determined to be correct and nobody else thought was correct. Mm-hmm. And so like he's like telling me to take a leave of absence before I even had an appointment, which was like batshit crazy in my opinion, and wildly inappropriate for him to do that, and then push for that to others, and that was, I mean, it didn't take long for me to get suspicious that like he was using this as a weapon. And then when I got to the point where I was just like not comfortable like talking about this with him anymore because I felt like he was weaponizing it. Mm-hmm. And then he tried to like encourage me to quit on multiple occasions, and even my colleagues were like, what the hell's wrong with this guy? This is like out of nowhere. And we honestly, a lot of us kind of like, not many people knew about it, but the ones that did, like we kind of just dismissed it because we honestly thought Gabe was like, it should have been a bigger red flag for me than it was. And I probably dismissed it too much, just thinking like we really just thought Gabe was losing his mind, and he had been in the mix for the manager's job and was apparently supposed to be the manager that fall and didn't get it. And then there was some back and forth about him being on the major league staff. And I mean, he was pretty disengaged from the department as a whole that entire off season. So it was a very bizarre dynamic. And so we thought that he was kind of just going through a weird period, and things would get back to normal. Yeah. And then, when that, like, he tried to get me to quit, and it was very bizarre. And then eventually, just decided that unilaterally that we couldn't work together anymore out of nowhere.
And so were you fired from the Dodgers organization, or did you walk away?
That was a point of contention. They had offered me a sort of like a half-baked position that they were kind of like trying to make up another position somewhere else.
Right.
And I gave it some consideration briefly, and I wanted to find a way to stay, but the way the process went down, it was, there was just no way I could stay in the organization after that. Gabe had done some incredibly dirty things that to force that to happen, and stuff that like you just can't work somewhere after that happens.
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable sharing any of it, or rather keep it private?
Yeah, I mean, the way that one of them, the final straw, which it would actually be hysterical if it weren't like didn't result in such a bad outcome, was there. And maybe at some point I'll post a picture of this because it was truly insane. You know how you have the signs on doors with like somebody's name and title?
Yeah.
So, like on an office door sign. So, there was apparently like a prank going on with some like good-natured, I guess like 3 or 4 months before this happened, with some junior members of our staff, where they had been putting up different signs on people's doors and in the Arizona office, and I think one of them. There was a guy that was fluent in Spanish and dealt with a lot of younger Latin players, so they called him the Coño coordinator for his title. And
the
then
Coño coordinator?
In response, yep. And in response, so Gabe wasn't in Arizona outside of spring training that often, so the sports psychologist or mental skills coach, he would use Gabe's office. And so the person put up a sign on Gabe's door that called the sports psychologist the no-field coordinator and a questionable right swiper. And the story behind that was like the guy had been coming from a great guy, like beloved by everyone in the organization. Didn't have a great sense of baseball. He was new to working in baseball, so he would ask questions like what's a pass ball, that kind of thing. And the guys would give him shit, but like it was like good natured and in jest. And the questionable right swiper piece was in regard to the guy would in a self-deprecating manner talk about some of his exploits on Tinder and other online dating apps, and that came in one day with a story about how he needed a new bed because he broke his bed when he hooked up with a heavyweight girl on Tinder. And so that became kind of like a running joke amongst those junior employees. And so fast forward like 3 or 4 months, like I may have like seen these signs. I like wasn't involved in making them, but like, and it wasn't like totally tracking on it since I was traveling so much, but like could have at least hazarded a guess like who was involved in that. And so we're like 6 weeks into spring training at this point. And so Gabe has been in that office for 6 weeks, and out of nowhere decides to send an email up to like Andrew Friedman, Farhan Zaidi, some other executives, and says that I put this disrespectful sign on his door. And mind you, he doesn't ask me about it. And is like, hey, did you do this? He just, or ask anyone else for that matter. I mean, everyone else would have like known what it was about. He sends it up to them with this really like elaborately crafted narrative about what those things mean, and said that like it was my way of accusing him of being out of touch, and like he didn't have any feel for what was going on in the department. And then that the questionable right swiper was me taking a jab at his sexual orientation. And I mean, like, I thought this was like completely insane, and like I almost like didn't even believe it until like I had the text with Farhan Zaidi of where like, I mean, that's how I learned about it from Farhan, like questioning me about it. I mean, it was completely asinine. And I mean, like after that, when I was like, my initial reaction was like, I was shocked. And then from there, I was like, okay, like, you know what, like maybe at least now we're going to like maybe this is what's been bothering Gabe, and he'll like take a deep breath and chill the fuck out and become a normal human again. Because like if I was like paranoid and convinced that somebody had done that to me, I'd probably be a little upset with them too. And, like I would have handled it very differently, but like maybe this is like what's been up his like this has been the burr in his saddle for a while, and maybe we can get back to normal now. And instead, like he just like refused to talk. He refused to talk to me about it at all. Refused to apologize, and was like, "Well, you can't really work together now. It'd be really awkward after that." Never talked to him after that, like once. I mean, the lack of integrity that showed is I mean, he's a real piece of shit through and through.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it sounds like like maybe these signs were bothering him for a long time, and he didn't say anything to anybody, and then all of a sudden he decided to find a scapegoat, and you were it.
You know, I don't even think he knew about them. I mean, they were. I don't know. I mean, I
gotta say, the Coño coordinator is brilliant, man.
and like we had like a really good dynamic in the department, and it was in a lot of ways Gabe was kind of a figurehead because he frankly wasn't that involved, and that was it wasn't like people were undermining him by any stretch. It was just like player development's a beast to manage, and he just chose not to do it. So we kind of like would include him and let him be involved where he wanted to be, and where he did that was fine. Like we made do. So I don't think we had a really pretty good thing going in what we were trying to build, and but with Gabe, it's always about Gabe, and I think he made that pretty clear.
And so, all right, so this is where I was going with this whole thing. So the way Wertheim characterizes it is that once you step away from the Dodgers, or you guys mutually agree to separate or whatever, that you had that you were waging war against baseball because you felt wronged by the way Cap treated you with the Dodgers. Is that accurate, or is that an exaggeration of this?
Well, I mean, that didn't happen. I mean, I think there's like some important context that is missing from that article, right, for sure. So, I mean, to be clear on the departure, what had happened is they had offered this alternative position, and I had gave it some consideration, and really, like, honestly, like more than I should have. Like after that happens, and there's really no like consequences for it. I mean, like there were people that wanted to fire Gabe over this, and again, there was no like accusation that I did anything wrong. Like I was just prior to that, I was offered a contract extension and a raise. I mean, this was like it felt like I was in the Twilight Zone type of thing. And when I asked Andrew Friedman about it and said like is it like, are we not going to like take a step back and like realize that this is a problem? And his response to it was that he was really relieved that nobody would write a sign like that, and that was that mean. And I said, yeah, but like accusing somebody of that and now like getting them to change jobs as a reason is like highly problematic in my opinion. And I mean, there was just like no reasoning with Andrew and Gabe have a weird relationship, and you kind of bring out the worst in each other, and you're just not going to get, there was no coming back from that. The writing was on the wall at that point. And so, they said I can take the other position or resign or be fired. And I said, I said, you guys I feel like I've done some damn good work here, and you guys have said the same. Like there's not a chance in hell I'm going to resign. I haven't done anything wrong. So like, basically like, fuck you, fire me. And so they did. And then from there, I had asked MLB to like there were some, like, in addition to like Gabe pushing for the leave of absence and trying to get me to quit and then getting rid of me when I wouldn't do that, there was he had made some inappropriate comments in addition to like along that like made me pretty uncomfortable, to say the least. And I had alerted MLB to that. I mean, like I had this all happened pretty quickly, and I didn't want to file a lawsuit because I knew that would, like, there's no way that ends well with like you staying in baseball. Like you can be right and you're still not gonna, like, it's not gonna work out well for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked Major League Baseball to look into it, and they, for whatever reason, like they have policies that say they do, but they patently refused, and were basically like, if you have a problem, you can sue. And then eventually, this wasn't until about almost 10 months later, 11 months later, they did decide to investigate. I had written a letter, and I think they were afraid of that getting out, and they said they'd look into it, and they did. I mean, the investigation was, disappointing to say the least. Like I went into it I didn't have any expectations that Major League Baseball was going to be an unbiased party. I mean, I knew enough to know what the score is on that front, but I did feel pretty strongly that, look, like if there's enough here where you have to do something or you're going to own the problem. And it really pissed me off because I had, like, as this is going on, like I was trying to work with Major League Baseball to make a lot of these veterans programs better and explain to them like this is not a matter of just like being out for blood and wanting revenge or accountability. Like I was trying to make a difference, and as pissed as I was about what had happened, I wanted to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. And it was incredibly frustrating because there was none of that with Major League Baseball. It was this matter of like nothing to be seen here, just like move along, we'll bury it and cover it up. And then eventually just like it went downhill even further when Gabe Kapler was hired by the Phillies to the point of where like they felt like at that point, like they had to basically come out and publicly say like I was a liar and there was nothing that they found in the investigation, which is really disappointing because I mean, that was not like a fun thing to talk about. I felt like I was like trying to do the right thing for others because this is a sensitive topic and say like, hey, this is like not okay. We need to, like, if somebody goes to an appointment and their manager decides that they need to take a leave of absence without any like professional experience or baseline for having that and before they have an appointment, that's highly problematic. Mm-hmm. And for Major League Baseball to like say that that's okay, like it is beyond insulting. And I mean, in my opinion, that's like really unforgivable.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
And I mean, they like to this day, I don't have a, like, I provided Major League Baseball with everything I had. They refused to provide me with any report on the investigation, and were like blatantly trying to sweep it under the rug from the outset.
Yeah. It sounded like the investigation was a complete joke, personally. But CT, did you have?
I mean, it was a sham.
Yeah.
Nick, I'm sorry if you're not allowed to talk about this or anything, but being that your dad is still a manager in the major league, I mean, does he have any opinion on this, or does he have a sort of a, something against Gabe Kapler if they ever come in contact during a game or something?
It's a good question. It's one that I get asked a lot, and like from my perspective on it, like I tried to keep my dad out of it in the sense that like I thought the merits of the issue spoke for themselves. And look, I'm not like naive enough to think that like it's not a factor, in the sense that like sadly they would have probably just like steamrolled me altogether if, I mean, they basically did do that, but without like any hiccups if my dad wasn't who he was. Yeah. Which is part of the reason I felt like I needed to stand up on this. And that's, but I also didn't want to, like, I think my hope was that the truth of the matter and the facts would speak for themselves, and really like shouldn't matter whether your dad's a major league manager or not. The facts are the facts.
Yeah.
But that was also a something that Major League Baseball is extremely sensitive to. And like, I wasn't going to drag my dad into it because it's not like I explained how I feel about that. And look, it's like a team sport. Like, it's, he's in a leadership position for the Cleveland Indians. And like, it's not really something they needed to be involved in. Mm-hmm. I think, as far as things with Kapler are concerned, it's certainly a bizarre dynamic where, I mean, my dad had Gabe as a player, and like, and I'll speak for myself on this too. And I know my dad feels this way. Like, a lot of people, Gabe was like very highly regarded back then. Mm-hmm. And, like, something changed in there with him. I mean, that's, kind of heard that from, I mean, quite a few. That was pretty clear. I mean, my dad hadn't spoken to him in years since he had him as a player. And it was pretty. My dad did get pissed in that it was when Gabe was hired by the Phillies, they went way out of their way to try to paint this as like my dad and Gabe are really close, and this is like a non-issue kind of thing. And that was a crock of shit and like pretty dirty on their part. And my dad let them know that and made that part very clear to them that like those kind of like dirty games aren't going to work. And that, you know, the whole experience was, like, to get back to your original question about like waging war on them. Like, I totally reject that notion, because the idea, like from my perspective, I had this like awful experience, like wasn't going to be able to go back and like undo that, but I did want to turn it into a positive. And like, I was one of the like only veterans working in baseball. I had heard from many other veterans who like were more than qualified and were getting the door slammed in their face. And at the same time, like Major League Baseball is exploiting the shit out of them for all, like you hear time and time again about how much Major League Baseball loves veterans, but interestingly enough, like will not actually like talk to veterans or families of the fallen when they're putting these programs together. And so I felt like as one of the only people that had actually like done this to make I thought I could play an important role in making it better and work my ass off to do that. Mm-hmm. And so to have that, like, really when they're like that's something that shouldn't really be all that controversial and shouldn't be that, I mean, like, who's going to dig in against that? And so when I'm trying to do that and Major League Baseball is totally unresponsive, you start to see that it's really for all the wrong reasons. And that's where I ultimately spoke out against them on that. I mean, that, like, there's not a lot of space to defend their actions on that. I mean, they haven't hired veterans. I pointed that out again. Like, they still haven't hired any. Like you do the math. Like for whatever reason, like, I don't know why this is that problematic for them.
Yeah, and it's funny that you brought that up, because I was gonna say I have like one or two more questions and then we'll wrap a bow on this. And the next question was actually has to do with when you went to the Mets and you had the same job, assistant the player director player development, and you got let go by the Mets because of how outspoken you were about Major League Baseball and what they were doing with the finances of with what they were making with the game apparel, the camouflage uniforms and stuff like that. And ironically, you're according to the article that I wrote, I think it was that I read in the New York Post. It was Sandy Alderson, a former Marine as well, that was the one that dealt you the final blow. You know, why did the Mets decide to take that stance? If I'm understanding it correctly, if your issue was with Major League Baseball, this sounds like a mob hit. You know what I mean? Like the boss sent the Mets to like deal the final blow. You know what I'm saying? Is that how it felt like to you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like, no doubt about it. I mean, the Major League Baseball like denies that they had anything to do with that. The Mets, I mean, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that, like, if like I had no problems with the Mets whatsoever. Got along great with everyone there. I mean, the Mets there's some intriguing challenges working there, but like I embraced like trying to do my part to make it better, and was, I mean, in a lot of ways, like was really enjoyed that challenge. And I mean, literally the only problem was me apparently speaking out on these issues. And I would say that the like more of the important factors to keep in mind here is I was speaking out on these issues after exhaustive effort. I mean, that was really a last resort. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's like I didn't view there being any other alternative to it at that point other than giving up. And that's and Sandy knew that, and I think like, you know, Sandy can speak for himself, but like as of, I mean, his and what he told me, and I've seen where he's like basically agreed with this and version of it, and he told me is that like, you've done a great job here, you've really had a big impact on the organization, but your comments aren't compatible with working in baseball. And I said, like, kind of, I mean, there wasn't much to say at that point. I mean, I knew the score. Sandy can speak for himself on this, why he's okay with certain things. But, I mean, Sandy was doing the bidding of the commissioner's office one way or another on that one. Mm-hmm. And it's, I mean, it's at the end of the day, like, Sandy can say whatever he wants and Major League Baseball can say whatever they want. Like, there's a reason that they're not like think about their response to all of these issues. Like I tried to work with them. I can't even begin to describe the amount of time and effort that I put in to working on these problems to try to solve them in a way that would make them look really good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the stuff I did with the Mets for Memorial Day reflected very well on the organization. And like these are not, there's nothing controversial about this. So like, if you're digging in on it, it's because you're doing something wrong.
Right.
And I mean, it's not normal if somebody asks you to when a reporter asks them to talk about their Memorial Day program, like, why do you get PR gurus and lawyers and spin doctors involved? Like, just fucking talk about it. Like, what's the problem? Mm-hmm. I mean, but it was like, it was incredible. I mean, it was like a bunch of chickens running around with their heads cut off because they partly they had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea where the money was going. They were caught in a lie. I mean, think about how simple it would be to, like, if the stuff that I was saying wasn't true. Like, Major League Baseball is deep pockets. They have a lot of lawyers working there. A lot of them are lawyers themselves, and they're very intelligent people. It's very easy to demonstrate if what I was saying was not true. Like, it's incredibly simple to show that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so why do you...
They've never done that.
Yeah. So why do you think that baseball isn't transparent in these areas and in dealing with this issue specifically, and what they do with the proceeds of these games? Because they are, in a sense, they are
lying about it. I mean, that's I think it's obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I mean, why wouldn't you be transparent about it?
Right.
There's not a whole lot of good reasons for that.
Is it the same issue with, the breast cancer awareness stuff when they have like the pink bats and the cleats and all that stuff, or are you not aware of that?
I can't speak to those as directly just because I'm not as familiar with like the fact pattern on that.
Yeah.
But on the military stuff specifically, like with they had a program that was called Welcome Back Veterans. When I dug into it, I mean, Welcome Back Veterans is not an entity. It's not a nonprofit. There's no board. There's no paperwork filed. There's nothing. It's really like, take our word for it. Mm-hmm. And again, that is not how like charitable endeavors operate.
Right.
And when you ask about it, they like their first response was to shut down the website. They and again, like you only operate this way if you have something to hide. That nobody at Major League Baseball could point to like who is responsible for administering these programs or who was overseeing them, who decided where money went. I mean, in some cases, they admitted that they had like no earthly idea what was going on, but they, rather than just try to like fix it, it was all like a sham. And I mean, at one point, like we were laughing about it, they had tried to like paint a rosy picture and bragged about how they had, they're like, we have, I think it was like 5 or 10 employees out of a couple thousand that were veterans, which is like almost impossible to do. Just like if you were actively trying to avoid them, that is like that's really hard to accomplish and like somewhat impressive. And rather than like address it, and like I had some recommendations, like none of the veterans that were emailing me asking for help or venting some complaints about their experience and trying to deal with baseball, nobody wanted a handout or unfair help. Like they had wanted to be looked at like fairly, and just like really wanted nothing more than to have their resume read. I mean, I don't think that's like asking too much. And the response from Major League Baseball could not have been more callous. And again, like the numbers don't lie. Like they have a problem. Like there's a reason that so few veterans are working in Major League Baseball. And
wow.
And if you look at, just compare to you have these other industries that are actively competing for the top-notch veterans that are transitioning out of the military, and you have Major League Baseball screams the loudest about supporting veterans, yet is one of the they're down there with the worst track records of any American employer of actually employing veterans, and aren't doing anything to fix it. I mean, they clearly have, for whatever reason, they have a systemic issue on their hands, but aren't willing to address it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to uncover here. I wish that we had more time, Nick. I think we're in total, these two parts, I think are going to be 3 hours. But
yeah,
I don't
want to bore you guys.
No, you're not boring us. This is it's a serious topic, and it's, you're right. I mean, at the start of every game, you have the national anthem. In these big games, you have the airplanes flying over. You have God Bless America. You have at Yankee Stadium, you have they always have somebody from the military stand behind home plate during God Bless America and stuff like that. But then you delve in deeper. It's what we're talking about here. It's you delve in deeper. You look a little closer, and you see that it's, in many ways, it's a crock of shit. It's a front. It's a nice face on an ugly issue, and it's disappointing.
I mean, the words that I'd use is the one that really bothered me was the Memorial Day stuff, because you're talking about people giving their lives in service to this country, and
right.
and are not there to speak for themselves.
Right.
And I think that is like really like a sacred issue. Yeah. And that is for Major League Baseball almost had this view that like they had a right. They felt like they almost like had I was infringing on their right to exploit it for profit.
Right.
And I mean, the Gold Star families that I dealt with, and when we were doing these Memorial Day tributes, I spoke to every one of the families involved personally, because I wanted to do it the right way and get their permission and make sure they were on board with it and not like hijack it as something we were doing on our own. And they were all, you're talking about people from vastly different backgrounds, living in different parts of the country, different political views, different, not all of them spoke English even. And they were still pretty consistent. And like the thing that mattered the most to them was having their loved one's story shared and remembered, and keeping their names alive.
Mm-hmm.
And that was consistent and uniform across the board. And I can tell you, not one of them said like, you know what, like, thank you, Major League Baseball, for wearing camouflage hats, because that is like really like honoring the day, the memory of my fallen loved one. And I mean, they saw this for what it was. It was a like nakedly callous way to exploit it and turn a profit. And then when you're not even going to tell them like how much money you're making off of this, or how much you're donating for selling a $40 hat, like how much of that is donated, and they hide behind lawyerly semantics. I mean, it's just absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, man. I mean, so what are, all right, here's my last question. So what are how can we what are some solutions to this? You know, what do we do? How can we spread awareness to this and all? You know,
I mean, like again, like I would separate the issues a little bit. So like one of the things that like I know you and I have engaged on Twitter from time to time, and one of the things that I try to do is send out stories about the individuals from time to time, and you know what, like I don't have that many followers. It probably doesn't have that big of an impact, but like just getting even if like a couple more people learn about their stories and read about them, that makes a difference, and that matters, and it matters a lot to their families. I think the thing that we did last year with the Mets and the tribute videos, and I'll send you some links so you can share them, and how we got the players involved in that. Mm-hmm. That was really, really cool, and I think meant the world to these families, and the players loved it, and the players were all about it.
Yeah. And
that was a way where I think like the sports world can actually have a really meaningful impact on these kind of things, and you get away from the idea of, I mean, one of the problematic tweets that got me in trouble was I had said that the Memorial Day program had basically turned into like Halloween, where it's an excuse for players to like, I mean, the camo becomes like a fashion statement, and it's like, look how like cool we are wearing camo, and it's honestly like a fucking joke and pretty insulting.
Man.
No, yeah, you're right. And you tweeted something else in regards to Rob Manfred talking to a Gold Star family, and didn't that get you in some hot water as well?
Yeah, I mean, I said something about how I'd like to look him in the eye and or have him look one of these families in the eye and tell them this is like a dignified program and a way to honor their fallen loved one, and again, like it stands. Like it, I mean, he had that, like part of the reason imagine they did this program for a decade at the point where I had made these criticisms. Like, can you imagine like doing a program, having some charity program where you're going to raise money and make this big deal about it, mm-hmm. and not even bother talking to the people that it's supposed to help? Like that's insane.
Yeah.
And you know what, it started like I don't think Manfred's the one that's sitting there personally making these decisions, but like, you know what, like so be it. Like when you're in charge, like the buck stops with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think if we keep doing this and keep talking about it and keep putting it out there, and you know, things will change eventually. It has to change. This it's not sustainable. You know what I mean? It's gonna crash eventually.
Yeah. That's
what I think.
Yeah, it will, and I think and it doesn't have like I don't view this as like this big. I mean, there's like I've had a bad experience, and there's some things that I'd like to be better, but I think that like that a lot of the reason I like fought on these things is because I'm optimistic about what baseball can be, and the positive force that I think it like should be for people, and what it should be as an institution, and behave honorably, and that's I just don't want to accept it for what it is right now, and it's because mm-hmm. I care about it that I want it to be better.
Same, man. Same. And I think that's a perfect way to end it, Nick. Thank you so much for talking to us for so long, and I hope that you'd be available to talk again, sometime soon, maybe a little more lighthearted topics next time. Yeah. Sorry that
of course, Dad. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right, man. Thanks, you.
Nick.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Thank you to Nick Francona and the Francona family. Nick, you're a hero. Every time I talk to you, whether it be on this podcast or over the phone or via text or whatever, I try to remember that I'm speaking to someone who put everything on the line for our country as a U.S. Marine. And we thank you for your service and for everything that you've done for being a truth seeker, a person who is not afraid to tell the truth and to put it out there into the universe. So without too much sappiness, thanks again, Nick, and thank you all for listening. Have you rated and reviewed the Welcome to the Show podcast yet? Please take 2 minutes to drop us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen to your pods. It helps others to find our content and to be a part of the conversation as well. Also, don't forget to visit audibletrial.com/welcome to the show to get your free audiobook download It's not a scheme. It's not a gimmick. It's the real deal. You'll get a free audiobook, any audiobook that's available on Amazon's Audible audiobook service. And you'll get a 30-day free trial with that as well. So once again, that's audibletrial.com/welcome to the show. Thanks, everybody. Peace.